All right, sixth graders, in lesson 10.3, we're going to talk about using the properties of rational numbers, so the properties of math, or the rules of this game of math, to our advantage to play the game more effectively. Okay? When you understand the rules of a game and you really know them well, you can use those rules to help you play the game more easily and more effectively. Okay? For example, in the commutative property, if you know the commutative property, you know that you can change the order of numbers so you can add them or multiply them to make easier numbers to work with. Okay? For example, let's say that you have a set of numbers like 4.5 times 5 times 2. Oh wait, no, not 5 times 2. Let's say we have 5 times, oh no, I know, 13 times. Okay? So, here's what I mean by using these. If you know that when you multiply a half times 2, it makes a whole. 1/2 times 2 is 1, right? 2 halves make a whole. So 4.5 times 2 is easier to do than 4.5 times 13, right? If we do 4.5 times 2 first, and then times 13, that's going to be easier because we can do part of it in our head. 4.5 times 2 is 9, and then do 9 times 13. That's a way of using the commutative property to make this an easier problem. What's 4.5 times 2? 9. And then do 9 times 13. 13 times 9. 9 times 3 is 27. And 9 times 1 is 9. Plus 2 is 11. Okay? That way you can multiply and eliminate the fraction, and then you just have whole numbers to work with. Okay? So, by knowing the commutative property, knowing that you can change these numbers around, it makes it easier to do this problem. Does that make sense? That's what you're going to be doing today, is using the commutative property to do these problems when you need to. How about using the identity property of multiplication? Or sorry, the zero property of multiplication. So let's say that you had numbers like 13 4/7 times 5.146 times 0. What would you do first? How could you simplify this more easily than just using the order method? What is any number times 0?
0.
0. So would it make sense to take the time to do 13 4/7 times 5 and 146 thousandths first? Would we do this first? Why would you want to do that first?
No, because you always go right to left.
No, you don't always go right to left. You work left to right. But what do you know about this answer times 0?
There's no point because it's just going to be 0.
Exactly. There's no point in finding this answer because it's just going to be 0. So using both the commutative property multiplying by 0, and the property of multiplication property of 0, you know that that's going to be 0. Does that make sense? How about any number plus 0? That's called the identity property of 0. So if you have a number plus 0, you know that that's just that number. The associative property can help you, again, find answers and put numbers together to make a 10, make a power of 10, so that you can add it or you can multiply it more easily. We did this before with whole numbers. So if we had, for example, 4 times 25 times 6. By putting together 4 times 25 first, it makes 100. Or in the first example, when we did 4.5 times 2, if that was in a problem, you could rearrange the parentheses in order to do a multiplication problem first. Okay? Go to your lesson on page 296. Open your books to page 296. Let's look at the first example. Example 1. Negative 1.5. Yeah, parentheses around that. Negative 1.5 plus 4 plus 2.5. Okay? Now, using the associative property, we could either do this in this order, or we could move the parentheses and do them in that order. And what this example suggests is to add these two first, because that would be easier and faster than adding negative 1/2 plus 4 and then adding it to 2.5. Here's why. Because if we put the parentheses here, what is the answer to this? 4 plus 2.5. 4 plus 2.5. Guys, look up here. 4 plus 2.5. Bennett? 6.5. Now, when we add a negative 1.5, that's really subtracting, isn't it? And we can take a half minus a half. A negative half and a positive half. So they cancel each other out, don't they? If they cancel each other out, now we just have negative 1 plus 6. 5. Very good. So by adding these two first, it was easier to combine and then do the half minus a half. Okay? That's an example of using the associative property to your advantage. Look at this letter B, the associative property of multiplication. Matt, that's enough now. Pay attention. The associative property of multiplication. So we can multiply two numbers together. Negative 1 1/3 times 5 times 3. Now, if we multiply these two together first, would we get a number with a fraction? Probably. Yep. And then we'd have to do another multiplication problem with a fraction. So could we do this in your head first? Because according to the rules, again, the associative property says that if they're all multiplication, then we can do them in a different order. So, Trevor, let's do the 5 times 3 first then.
5 times 3, that's 15.
15. So now we have a whole number and then multiply it by this fraction. How do you multiply a fraction or a mixed number and a whole number? Do you remember? A whole number times a mixed number. Tate, pay attention, stop drawing. Here?
You take one number away from it and make it 10 cents. Or whatever you need to make it. You can make it 3/3 since it's 1/3.
Alright, so we're going to have to change them both to fractions, right? So we can change this one to a top-heavy fraction. Matt, how do you do that?
Top-heavy fraction. You would switch 15.
No. This one, the mixed number to a top-heavy fraction.
3 times 1 equals 3, and then plus 1 equals 4.
So this is,
-4 plus 9 times 18.
no, -4. You have to make it a fraction. So it's -4
over 3.
over 3 times
15 over 1.
15 over 1. Now what do we do? Now how do we simplify this, Josh? Look diagonally. Good. Change it to 5 and 1, and then multiply across. Yep, -4 times 5 is -20 over 1, so it's just -20. Yep. Finish. Yep. So you're going to be using these properties that we've gone through, and using the order of operations, you're going to be combining these in a way that helps you to make it easier. Okay? Let's go to your worksheet. What I want you to do is, from the worksheet, I want you to show your work next to them and write the answer. So on your worksheet it has the first question, 8.2 minus 4.1 plus 3. Now, these are all a part of the same step in the order of operations, right? There's no parentheses, there's no exponents, there's no multiplication and division. So we can use the commutative property or the associative property if we wanted to. Okay? Always insert a plus sign in front of the minus sign when you're doing these. Put a plus sign in front of the minus sign. And then, would you want to keep this in the same order? Or change the order? So do this first. Yeah, so just keep the same order. Because you can do this in your head, can't you? 8.2 minus 4.1.
No, 1.1.
2 minus 1 is 1. 8 minus 4 is,
Four.
so it's 4.1. It's half.
7.1.
And then add the 3.
7.1.
So it equals 7.1. Questions on that?
Oh.
Rated?
I don't have a question on that. I have a question on number 4.
Okay. Number 4. 6 times the 3.5 minus 1 3/4. And there's parentheses here, so can we change the order on this one? Can we change the order on that one?
Number 4?
Yep. Is that number 4?
No.
Number 3.
That's number 3.
Oh, that's number 3, I'm sorry. Well, let's do number 3. Can we change the order on this one?
No. Well, yes. That's it.
Can we do 6 times 3.5 first?
Mm-hmm.
No, because of the parentheses, we have to follow the order of operations, and we have to do the subtraction first on this one. Okay? Now,
Can't you use this?
Kate, stop drawing. How do you subtract fractions again? Read it.
You take, so, what do you mean by subtraction? Okay.
Well, 3.5 minus 1 3/4, we can't do the
So
subtraction
you
the way it
take,
is.
10 from, the 3.
We're going to need a common denominator, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so confused right now. Okay, you make the 2 4, and you make the 1 2,
Yep, so we have to multiply this by 2.
and then you put the 3 down too. You take 3 down, and
Now we have 2/4 minus 3/4. Can we do 2/4 minus 3/4?
no.
Now what do we do next?
You take, well, yeah, you can do 2/4 minus 3/4.
No, you can't.
No, we don't have enough pieces for subtraction.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So we're going to have to take away one of the wholes.
Yeah, you take one of the holes and then give that, like that 2, like 2 more, so it's 4/4.
Good. So now how many pieces do we have?
1 4. Well,
4 plus 2 is
6.
6/4 minus 3/4.
3/4.
3/4. Good. Now we can do 2 minus 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. And so this equals 1 3/4. Now we have to go back and multiply 6 times 1 3/4. No, it's not 6 3/4 because we have to multiply fractions times fractions. So you have to do 6/1 times 1 3/4 as a fraction.
We need to put it into
Top heavy fraction. What is the top heavy fraction?
7/4.
Good. Then can we reduce this to what? Take out the 2's, yeah. 3/2. 3 times 7 is 21/2. Yep. So what is the answer there? 21/2. That's a mixed number?
10/1.
10 1/2. Yep.
That was number 2. 3. 3 seconds.
Did you already get that for 3?
Yeah, we used a calculator.
10, 15.
You used a calculator.
Okay, copy that.
You used a calculator.
Follow along, Tate. Put that away. Jack,
On number 2, you can get 2 different answers.
there's only one right answer.
What if you do 2 times 2.5 times 4 is 7.5 times 4 would be 30. And then if you do 10 by
For number which? For which number? Jack?
2.
Number 2? Oh. Do you, when you do the order of operations, should you do multiplication or subtraction first? That tells you what to do. Yep, so you have to do multiplication first. Okay. Armand,
How come on number 1 we did the subtraction first?
because that's just subtraction and addition, isn't it? So when you have subtraction and addition, that's in the same step in the order of operations. That's in step 4. Both of them are in step 4. Nope, they combine multiplication and division in one step, and addition and subtraction in one step. And so if there's multiplication and division, you can change the order. If there's addition and subtraction, you can change the order. No. You won't get different answers if you make it plus negative. That's why you insert the plus sign in front of a minus sign. And then you get the same answer.
There's no 5.
No, Miss Mosky, can you do my question now?
No, it's negative.
Can you
You
answer
don't
my
have to change
question
the order, but if you want to change the order, you have to put the plus sign.